Hello, beautiful people. I am so happy you're here. Give us 1 second while we connect to our Instagram. This is a very exciting opportunity that we have. And I'm super excited. We're almost connected. 1 second. All right. It looks like we are connected, and I just want to officially say hello, beautiful people, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jennifer Diamond, and I'm a certified plant-based nutrition coach living a whole food, plant-exclusive lifestyle for health and well-being. And today, I have a special guest that I am thrilled to welcome. Chris Kendall is in the house, and he is a registered holistic nutritionist, a raw food lifestyle coach, a raw food chef, a yoga teacher, and a skateboarder. He is also incredibly smart and an incredible resource for information about living a raw food lifestyle. And I couldn't be more excited to have you here today. Hello, Chris, and welcome.
Hey, Jennifer, thank you so much. Really appreciate you and all you're bringing to the table and for bringing me on to your table as well today. That's awesome. I'm so stoked to be here.
Yeah, I know last time we were together, we were promoting the 2025 Vegan Health Bundle, and that was so much fun. I know you're originally from Canada, and I think you still live there, but aren't you actually now in Sweden?
I actually now live in Sweden full time. I just got permanent residence, so I'm kind of a Swedish, not citizen yet, but a permanent resident. But you're right. I grew up in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada, till I was 17, and then kind of a nomad for a bunch of years, and kind of rooting down here a little bit. I really like it out in Europe.
That's awesome. Wow. I've heard a lot of amazing things about Sweden. And just wondering, can you
Mhm.
tell us a little bit more about your background and how long you've been raw, or why you decided to begin living a raw lifestyle, and how your life has
For sure.
changed,
Yeah.
since you decided to go down that route?
Yeah, it's not something I ever would have thought I would have chosen. In fact, I've often said that younger me probably would have made fun of older me. I remember when my sister went vegetarian, I thought she was really silly, and make T-Rex noises around her and stuff. But I mean, it kind of starts back to skateboarding. Skateboarding was my main kind of wayward staff, kind of leading me where I wanted to go. And that unfortunately though did lead me to the bottom of alcohol bottles and smoking and partying and falling apart. And I was just looking for something, and I found yoga, and then I found nutrition, and I was just like enamored. I couldn't believe that this was more than just a pleasure tube. So I started researching all I could, and over about a 5 and a bit year journey of slowly refining my diet, I found the raw food diet, and it blew me away even further. And I went raw overnight, and it completely changed my life. It got me way more connected with my purpose, why I'm here. Because before that, I'd been studying nutrition and doing yoga for 5, 6 years, and yeah, I was just doing it for that, for skateboarding. But when I went into raw food and I met Dr. Doug Graham, and he kind of simplified things for me, I knew this is what I wanted to do. I just wanted to share this message and help other people to make this lifestyle a lot more fun and easy. And it's changed everything for me. It's shortened my recovery time. I was actually really depressed and having a hard time, the drinking and smoking and falling apart and eating really, really poorly and all that kind of stuff. And it's connected me to a whole huge, amazing community of like-minded people, and traveled the world, being a chef or yoga teacher and speaker at festivals and retreats around the world over probably 25 events over the last decade. And it's just an amazing, amazing journey.
Wow. I I am just love hearing about your story and what it has done for you. So I'm not fully raw, but I do enjoy eating a very high raw diet. And one of the things that I personally struggle with is maintaining some of my levels like iron and protein and other essential vitamins, minerals, and nutrients. And so, I thought that this would be great to share with others because you're very fit, and this works for you, and if there's something that we're missing here, it would be great. So I have so many questions. Um,
I'm so happy to go into all of them, and I want to preface as well. Something that Dr. Doug Graham mentioned before to me that really stuck, and I repeat a lot of the stuff he said because he's a brilliant man, and his book, The 80-10-10 Diet, is to me is the Bible of nutrition. I'd put that as the number one to read book for anyone who's interested in nutrition and raw food nutrition. But he said, you know what? We're all raw foodists. It's just that some of us choose to eat some cooked food. You know, it's a kind of a fun, different take on it.
Oh yeah, that's great. I have not read the book yet, but I am going to have to get it and read it because I think that if you're recommending it, that it's probably filled with lots of good tips and insight that might be very helpful for me and other people. I want to take a second to just let you know that we have lots of people saying hello in the chat. And we've got Elle saying hello, apple a day. Good morning, Jennifer, Todd, and Chris. I'm looking forward to this. We've got Core Scorpy. It's showtime. And everybody, there's Jill Caperton. Hello to everyone, she says. And just looking to see if there's any questions. Let's see. I'm fairly sure Chris and I crossed paths at yoga class in Vancouver, says apple a day. That would be fun.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I wonder when that was because I used to live in Vancouver, and actually I went raw while living in Vancouver. I used to go to a Kundalini yoga studio in Kitsilano a whole bunch. So maybe it was there, and that would have been, oh gosh, that would have been in the early 2000s, maybe 2001 or 2, 3 max, something like that.
Yeah. Well, that was a while ago. Let's see. Hold on.
Yeah.
I'm trying to go back to where my chat was. Oh, no.
Unfortunately, I wasn't able to connect to my Instagram,
Oh, you're kidding.
just so you know. But
Oh, bummer.
no, it won't let me click go live or anything on it. But we can hopefully repost this here after.
Absolutely. We will repost this after. We'll get you taken care of. And I'm sorry about that for people watching the replay. We were hoping it would work out. We have Dan Shibuya saying, thanks so much for doing this, guys. You keep me going. Mona saying hello. Colleen is saying hello. And we just have a lot. Serenity Blooms is saying hello. A lot of people just saying hello. And I'm just looking to see if there's any questions. The Urban Pharmacy is here. It's Stacy. Good to have you here. And so anyways, okay, well, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we will make sure to get to them. And we're so grateful that you're here. So, what I wanted to say is, start out with this question for you is, what are the most common nutrient absorption challenges that people face when they're transitioning to or living a raw food lifestyle? Is there anything that's common?
Yeah, there definitely can be a few. I'd almost say that it's just common across the board for people to be coming from a place where they don't really have optimal digestion nor awareness of their digestion. And, if their digestive system is overburdened and they're coming from a place of, some sickness or allergies or anything like that, well, they're going to be coming in, of course, with a reduced microbiome and a diminished ability to digest and absorb all the nutrients, but there definitely are some that could be a little more common, and it depends upon the application of the raw food diet and how people do it. Things like iron and calcium are common, of course. Zinc are some of the big ones. B12 is one of the most common for anyone on any diet. But each of those have their own specifics that we could definitely go more into.
Wow. Okay. So this is really insightful to know that it has to do with also, I think what you were saying is that the way that we choose to eat the raw food diet and of course our digestion and where we're coming from. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, if someone is already whole food plant-based or, it just depends on where they are. But if you're already doing this and you're trying to transition into a more raw lifestyle, how do you make sure that you're eating in a way that is really going to help you and your microbiome and everything? Because some people feel like, well, I've been doing this raw thing or I've been doing this vegan thing a long time. Why is it not, why are my levels off or whatever?
Yeah. So, I mean, it does become really individual. I mean, stress can even really play a big role as well, because when we're stressed out, we're not really secreting as much HCl, hydrochloric acid, in the digestive tract, and enzymatic activity is lowered, and so a lot of times, we come into situations where we're worried, and that worry of itself brings stress and kind of creates the situation that we're trying to avoid in the first place. So I just wanted to point that out, 'cause stress can be really, really big. But depending on where someone's coming from, if they're already been applying a raw food diet, or they're already plant strong, and they're eating lots of plant-based foods, and increasing the veggies and stuff like that, it's going to be a very different journey, right? If someone's coming in from a processed food, high fat, alcohol based diet, they're going to have a very different microbiome going into the raw food diet, and they're going to experience more challenges to, one, shift out of where they are, and then two, shift into where they want to go. Whereas again, if somebody's already eating a lot of different plant foods, they already likely have a fairly robust microbiome that's not going to have as much of an issue. But the thing is, with a raw food diet, each time you go from, let's say, a standard American diet or standard Western diet, to, say, more whole food omnivore, to vegetarian, to vegan, to raw vegan, each one of those steps, the volume of food needs to go up, because raw foods and plant foods are more calorically dilute, generally with water, the more you go raw. So that means they're lower calorie per gram. So it is a challenge for some people just in the beginning to, one, eat enough calories, but then two, also to learn how to do so eating the foods that are the easiest for digestion without overburdening their digestive system. Because I could talk about how I eat, but being a raw foodist for over near 21 years now, if someone is new to this and they just try to force what I'm eating, thinking that's the correct way to do it, they could vastly overburden their digestive system. So it does take a bit of an individualized approach, but at the same time, it is kind of the slow and steady wins the race. And with a raw food diet specifically, depending again where someone's coming from, because if someone's coming from a really high fat diet and inactivity versus, say, a lower fat plant-based diet and being active, there's going to be a little bit of a different transition for their whole metabolic function and their pancreatic function. And so it might be a little bit more easy to go, say, cold turkey for someone who's been doing plant-based. But if they're coming from a really higher fat processed food lifestyle, I'd maybe even recommend a bit of a transition through plant-based, and getting firm in that and lower fat, so that they can hopefully slowly start to release and reverse their insulin resistance. And then with the raw food specific, though, focusing in on the fruits, because they're the easiest to digest. They're really, really nutrient dense, really watery and stuff like that. And as their digestion starts to normalize and they feel all right, slowly increase the greens and the vegetables, chewing really, really well, so that your body can slowly adjust. And what I see some people have a hard time with is, they hear maybe that eating 1 or 2 pounds of greens a day, which that's what I do and I recommend. So I love greens and I love veggies. I want to get a lot of those in. They hear that and they try and hammer home and do mostly raw vegetables, in the beginning, and under eat fruit, because maybe they heard that fruit is evil and it's too high in sugar. But this can be super hard. This can be really hard to get anywhere near enough calories from raw vegetables. Like for myself, for example, I can get all my caloric needs met with 8 to 12 pounds of fruit. But if I was just going to eat vegetables, and this is per day, if I was looking at just vegetables, I'd be looking at 30 pounds. We're looking at even higher than that. It's 40 heads of romaine lettuce compared to 20, 25 bananas. So it's a bit of a different thing. So I know I've kind of went on a side tangent there, but it is focusing in on those foods that are easier to digest. And something that I learned really early on that has really helped me, especially for others too who are coming into this lifestyle with problematic digestion, is utilizing food combining, which just streamlines digestion by putting foods in categories that digest more optimally together. Again, reducing stress, making sure you're hydrated, and all those good things can really help with the digestion aspect.
Wow, that's awesome. So if someone was trying to figure out about pairing the foods, Is there any like beginner kind of starter area to start? Or, if somebody wanted to dive into more information about that, was there a starting point you can recommend?
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, I like to simplify things as much as humanly possible. And that book I mentioned, 80-10-10, I would recommend it as a really good starting point to go into all of this kind of stuff. Um, I have meal plans and apps and lots of free recipe videos too that kind of goes into all this stuff. But if I could simplify it, one of the things that Dr. Graham taught me the first day I met him in person was, if you're hungry, eat fruit. All the fruit you care for, no restriction, no need to force it, but just enjoy as much fruit as you want. If you don't feel like fruit, have some greens, tender leafy greens or some of the easiest greens to digest. They're super, super mineral dense. They give you more of that savory fix. So when you're sweeted out, you hit the greens. And if you do both of those enough throughout the day when you're hungry until you're full, and you're doing it enough to maintain your weight, it's hard to do much better. Now, that's not to say that that's the only thing I recommend or that's the only thing you should ever eat. That's the most simplistic view of it, and just kind of recognizing that when we're looking at nutrition, most people look at nutrition trying to find the biggest, best sources of each individual nutrient, and like piecemeal it together. Like, I'm going to grab this, I'm going to grab that. Whereas natural hygiene and kind of a more fruit-based raw food diet, what it looks at is what foods mimic what we actually need in the ratios that we need them. Like, do we necessarily need the highest source of this, or do we need foods that match our physiological, biological design and offer nutrition in amazing proper ratios? And when you look at nutrition from that view, fruit is the number one food choice we can put on our plate, and vegetables is number two. But the funny thing is, and that's speaking in terms of calories, but when we start talking about nutrients, well, greens and veggies are number one, and fruit is number two. And the cool thing is, almost any nutrient we can look at that is, a food-borne nutrient. So we could talk about, bacterial-borne nutrients like B12, or, outside-derived nutrients from the sunshine and vitamin D. When we look at any nutrient that we require, there are no foods that come closer to matching our nutrient needs than fruits and vegetables. And anything that fruit is number one in, vegetables is number two in, and anything that vegetables is number two in, fruit is number one in. So they're perfect complementing foods, and it's just a really simplifying backbone to the diet.
Wow. Okay. I love all this information that you're putting out there. Thank you so much. So I'm wondering, are there specific vitamins and minerals that raw food eaters need to be extra mindful of for absorbing effectively, outside of what you were just sharing, that I know everybody's different?
Yeah, yeah. I love that you said mindful of. I often use the phrase conscious over concern. Because I don't really, again, kind of going back to stress, and if we're worried about, that's a little bit of a different quality than being mindful or conscious of, right? And there are some, none that I've seen be short-term problematic, but things that are wise to look into and be aware of over the months and years as you go along with the raw food diet. The biggest one I would say is vitamin B12. And mentioning, as I said, it's not really like as soon as you go into a vegan diet or a raw food diet, that's like something you need to be immediately worried about or even really aware of, because it takes anywhere between 5 to 10 years without really being subjected to B12 for your levels to go from topped up to deficient if you come into it topped up. But as I mentioned earlier on in this chat we have, virtually everyone on any diet has a propensity to be lower in B12 than is adequate because of the sterilized environment we live in, unhealthy practices that can diminish our B12 absorption, or as well as can diminish or can use up our B12 in our system. It's also known as kind of a stress hormone. So if we're consistently stressed out all the time, we cannot be getting enough. But B12 is probably the biggest one. Zinc, calcium, iron, those omega-3, making sure to get a good balance of that. I'd say those 5 are probably the biggest. Iodine is another one. And we could go individually into any of those if you like.
Okay. Yeah. Whatever you think is good, was good for me. I mean, I think this is all really good information to share with people, because like you said, there's all these different areas where people can be, and just to make sure that they understand, where there might be trouble within your own system, and being able to execute something to help yourself. And hearing you, and I hear often about mindfulness, about stress, and about that whole component. The food is so important, but I really am learning and feeling strongly that it's really important to make sure that your stress level and everything is low, so that your body can do what it needs to do effectively. Is that correct?
Absolutely, 110%. I mean, it's kind of funny because I could stand on a soapbox and try and explain how I believe that the raw food diet is the most nutritious, best food on the planet, the best diet on the planet, and that if you're eating a predominantly raw food diet, then you're probably the last person that needs to worry about nutrition. Everyone else would probably be smarter to be worrying about it more than anyone else. Especially it's so funny when people are on processed food diets and drinking alcohol and smoking, and then they see eating a lot of fruit, and they're like, that can't be healthy. What are you doing? It's kind of an interesting thing, but it happens all the time, but it is just really a super simplistic approach. And again, kind of going back to that reality that, these are the most nutrient dense foods on the planet per calorie. The biggest reason that people this is actually a really important note, that people actually have issues on the raw food diet or may not be getting enough of X, Y, or Z nutrient, is because they undereat calories. It's really the only diet that I know of that people have a hard time getting enough calories in. And that specifically is because, again, raw fruits and vegetables, they're the lowest calorie per bite foods out there. Greens being like really the lowest, and fruits, they're still low compared to cooked foods and other stuff like that. And they're also super satiating because they have lots of water content, they have lots of volume, they have lots of nutrition, but they're low calorie, so people end up under eating them. And that, of course, can lead to not getting enough. And coupled with that, of course, though, is under eating greens. If they're not eating enough greens or veggies, then they're more than likely to be eventually getting short in some dense alkaline minerals.
Yeah, sorry about that if you heard ringing in the background.
It's all good.
It's our spam phone.
Oh,
anyways, okay. Yeah, no, that's all really good. And, I feel like most people that have been brought up on the standard American diet or are living that way, we're not accustomed to eating large quantities of fruit or large quantities of anything. Everything is, small, quick go, and full of stuff that is harmful, in my opinion. So it's something that we really need to re-understand or program our minds to think that this is good. Our body needs this. It's okay to have, like you said, 20 bananas. Some people.
Yeah, I normally eat 15 to 18 for lunch.
Wow.
So
wow.
Yeah.
So what are some of your biggest myths or misunderstandings about raw food and nutrient absorption that you hear?
Oh, wow. Well, okay, the first one, there's a couple really, really big ones. The first one that is always, the first question people ask is the protein one. People worried about getting enough protein. And, I have shorter, glib kind of answers, and I have longer, more science-derived ones. Sometimes I like to just flex and, put that up there, or, point to the largest, strongest animals in the world, like ox and elephants and, gorillas, which are primarily really vegan animals beyond maybe some insects and stuff like that occasionally, but they're eating fruits and vegetables a lot. But protein is the number one concern that most people have, and the reality is, fruits and vegetables, they can range from about 4% up to 35 plus 50% protein per calorie. More correct would be the essential amino acids. And it's kind of funny because, I've been researching nutrition since around 99, and it used to always be said that, all plant foods contain some protein, but they're missing in essential amino acids. And so you need to pair them together and mix them together and make sure that you have your rice and your beans and this and that. But you look around to nature and you notice that no other animal in nature is like purposely mixing foods together. They're eating the foods they're biologically, physiologically adapted to, usually one at a time, until they're totally full. And it actually has become much more common knowledge in the last couple of years that every single plant food actually contains all of the essential amino acids. There are no whole plant foods that don't contain all the essential amino acids. They just come in varying quantities. So while while I do promote variety to make sure you're getting enough minerals and vitamins, and you're satisfying your tastes and your excitement factor to get enough calories and to enjoy it, I usually promote simplicity in the short term. But this all to say, really, the whole protein thing is, most people are worried about protein, but they don't actually know how much protein they need. They might read an article in a muscle magazine or on a fitness channel that really promotes a super high level of protein for like the absolute like pinnacle, muscle synthesis. And, they put themselves in the category of an Olympic, weightlifter that needs to be bulking as huge as humanly possible and think that they need that high level of protein. So they come to raw food and say, how can I get 200 grams of protein per day? And it's like, you really need that, the short story of it is you don't. You can really look into the science. Our protein needs are much lower than most people think. Roughly our protein needs, they say, are like, between 6 to 8% max. When you're looking at studies on children and infants and how much they get, and the respective growth period that they're in, it's actually quite hard to not get enough protein from whole foods. On a varied diet where you're eating a lot of processed foods, let's say you're adding in a whole bunch of oil, or you're adding in a whole bunch of sugar, or you're adding in a whole bunch of flour, like all these foods that are stripped of their co-minerals and vitamins and all that good stuff, you can actually have a harder time getting enough protein. But going back to what I said before, when we're eating a whole foods, plant-based, high raw or raw diet, it's actually hard to not get enough protein, and most people get too much, to be honest. But I'd say that'd be number one. Do you have any kind of side questions with that, or should we go to number two?
I think that's really good. I know personally, I have, just to throw this in there, I have had my blood tests show that I was a little low on protein, and I upped my beans and it went right there. So just like you said, making sure that you're getting in enough calories, getting in enough variety. And I know that, I don't know if you could see it, but I've got my sprouting beans going on here, and so
Nice.
so
Yeah, usually the lysine and a couple other amino acids that are a little bit lower in fruits and greens, but are higher in legumes and beans and stuff like that, can really boost those numbers up if you're a little bit low on one side. You also did hit the hammer on the head as well when you were mentioning before about fitness and about calories, because in order to be optimally healthy, we are required to be fit. Every single animal on the planet has a certain level of fitness for them to maintain their life and to gather their food and stay safe and all that kind of stuff. And human beings are no different. And if we do not have some form of relative fitness in our life, we're going to be under eating calories, and to be optimally functioning and healthy, which also means we're going to be under eating protein. So it's really interesting, because a lot of people think that, okay, I'm going to start working out, so I need to start focusing on higher protein foods. Whereas the model that I go with, and I found incredible results, is instead I'm just going to focus on eating enough food. I don't have to worry about specific protein foods. It's just the more active I am, the harder I'm pushing myself, the hungrier I'm going to be, the more fruit, the more greens I'm going to eat, maybe a little bit more nuts and seeds and stuff like that. But it naturally brings up those protein levels without actually needing to focus on protein per se.
That's awesome. Okay, thank you for that clarification. Yeah, and if you want to go into the next, number two, I'm good with that. And then after that, we do have a question in the chat.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. That sounds good. So I'd say protein would be probably number one. Number two is kind of a bit of a toss-up, maybe between iron or I mean iron or calcium. I mean, both of those can be remedied fairly easily by eating more greens. If someone's looking at this from a fruitarian perspective, worried about eating greens for killing the plants, it's kind of more of a philosophical kind of view. I believe that's at our detriment. I haven't seen any real evidence to suggest that there's benefit from excluding greens from the diet or vegetables. I really do find in my own personal experience and my coaching experience and my nutritional knowledge that greens are indispensable. And if people are, eating greens, but they're still finding that they're having problems, maybe they're slowly going anemic, or they've done blood tests and they're having issues with those minerals. It can be kind of going back to the beginning about introducing too much too fast and not really having the microbiome to actually digest and absorb those nutrients really well. So what I usually suggest, and kind of going back to what I mentioned before, if someone has implement digestion or if they're not absorbing super well, maybe having a bit of a transition, there can even be a 24 to 36 hour water fast or juice fast, and then, introducing more fruits, and then slowly introducing greens. And that can honestly be like a small handful or a couple leaves at a time with your fruit meals or with whatever meal you're eating. And generally speaking too, instead of just all of a sudden at the beginning having, a pound of greens at your dinner meal and trying to make the giantest salad you've ever had, instead, again, have a couple leaves or a couple handfuls with every single meal that you eat, so that you're not overburdening your digestive tract and your microbiome. You're actually allowing it to slowly shift. And the beautiful thing with doing that as well, eating fruits and greens together, is that the fruits are generally really rich in vitamin C, which really helps with the iron uptake and absorption. And also, kind of going back to what we talked about before, kind of being mindful and chewing really well. I really like Gandhi's phrase, chew your drink and eat your food, or no, chew your drink and drink your food. So just essentially meaning like, chew it until it's a drink, and that'll serve you really, really well because you don't have teeth in your stomach. Right?
I love that.
That can really help.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay, let me go into the chat. We had a question from Colleen. Does Chris grow his own food, specifically fruit, since he eats so much? And if he lives in an area where he can year round, and then someone shared, yes, you're in Sweden.
Yeah. It's kind of a funny one because, there are some people that really talk down on the food availability today and talk about fruit being either just too poor quality or no minerals or too high sugar or this or that. And I've done a lot of traveling over the years, and I've spent months and months at a time in the tropics eating like fresh grown, tree ripened tropical fruits. And then I've also been in the middle of winter in Saskatchewan, Canada, eating grocery store conventional fruits. I've planted probably hundreds of fruit trees. Actually, over 100 fruit trees and thousands of trees. I used to be a tree planter, actually. But very few that I've been the main beneficiary of eating the fruit underneath. Usually it's like traveling and planting them in different places and stuff like that. So the short answer to that is actually I grow very little. I don't have a green thumb, and I'll be honest, I actually don't enjoy growing food. I don't have plants in my house. If I had someone else growing it for me, I would love that, but it's just not my thing. I'd rather go to a grocery store and pay money for someone else to grow it, to be honest. But I mostly eat conventional produce, and that's led to every single test I've ever had with every doctor saying I have the best results they've ever seen. So I don't buy the fear of conventional or store-bought fruit. I definitely acknowledge that different countries and different places have different practices and what they spray and how much they spray and when they spray. So being aware of those things is really helpful. I also do use a oxidizing or electrolyzing produce cleaner, which helps break down synthetic chemicals and rinse them off really, really easily. And I also, of course, acknowledge that, homegrown, organic, wildcrafted, biodynamic is the best. I mean, wild is going to be the best, but homegrown is going to be better. Absolutely. I do grow some of my own sprouts. I've had compost, I've had gardens and stuff, but being a nomad and traveling, stuff like that, it made me realize I didn't have a green thumb anyway.
Wow, I'm surprised. And
yeah, I'm a little bit. I'm a little different one because I don't really like that. I don't really like growing stuff that much. It's not that I like don't like it. It's just I'd rather someone else do it. It's just not
Yeah.
my thing. But also beyond that too, like I prefer to live in a temperate or subtropical climate rather than the tropics. Because a lot of people go into raw food and they, envision a perfect paradise and just living in the tropics in a hammock and fresh fruit all the time, and don't realize that it is really hot. There's a lot more bugs. There's also the reality of it being a lot of work if you want to have your own property and grow all your own food. And I love the convenience of being in a city where I can just go down the street and buy stuff instead of needing to do all the other stuff, the tilling, not really tilling, but all the prep work and the composting and weeding and all that stuff.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate that because I know that, people have a perception of the right way to do something. And sometimes,
Yeah.
being your own gardener and doing all of these things is, perceived as the right way, but there's so many different right ways depending on what works for you. So I appreciate you sharing that. So
Absolutely.
yeah, so can you explain how the body absorbs fat soluble versus water soluble
Mhm.
vitamins and how that impacts a
Mhm.
raw diet?
That's a good one. And I mean, in its simplest form, water soluble vitamins are more prominent in lower fatty foods, and they don't require fat to be absorbed. They're readily absorbed through the gut lining, and they're also excreted a lot faster. So they need to be replenished a lot more often. You're thinking about vitamin C as one of these main ones, right? With the fat soluble vitamins instead, A, D, K, E, I think those are the main ones. Um, those ones require some fat to actually be able to be uptaken and delivered to our cells and our body. So the beautiful thing is all whole foods do have some fat. People don't think about it, but like bananas have some fat, apples have some fat. What is it? Dates are really low. I think they're one of the lowest. They're low in protein as well. They're like just super high carbohydrate. But whole foods, they have fats. Even lettuces and stuff, they actually have more fat in them than fruits typically. You get something like butter lettuce. It's not coincident that it's called butter lettuce. It's actually really high in fats and really creamy. And the beautiful thing is kind of what I was talking about in the beginning when we were mentioning about problematic nutrients. One of those was omega-3, because a lot of times people vector more to the high omega-6 fats like almonds and cashews and tahini and stuff like that. And the beautiful thing though is, we're looking for like a 1-to-1, 1-to-4 ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 for a whole host of benefits, whether we're talking about mental health or uh, electrical impulses and nerve function and a whole bunch of things, inflammation markers, all that stuff. But fruits and vegetables are naturally in that ratio. So when we're eating fruits and vegetables, we're getting that, but we want to add in a little bit of extra fat as an extra buffer and for extra caloric density, and also for the host of minerals and other nutrients that are found in those. So with the fat soluble vitamins, you know, we can just add like a tablespoon of fat to our dinner meal, with leafy greens and stuff, and that's usually the best one that we're adding the fats to is the greens, because those are going to be more dense in those minerals that are going to benefit from the extra enhanced absorption from adding just that little bit of fat. A tablespoon or two or three can really do it.
Okay. Yeah, I often hear people pairing fruit with walnuts or something like that, but I love that you're sharing about the importance of it in greens. And we did have a question in the chat from Mona. Can we have the product he uses in his produce? I'm thinking that she's wanting to know what you use to clean.
Oh yes. Yeah, it's called Aqua Pure, and you can actually. I do have an affiliate link. I get like $2 or $3 for everyone sold, I think. But if you want to support my banana habit, it is linked in my bio in at the Raw Advantage on Instagram. So that's there. But it's really interesting. I did want to also mention with the adding walnuts and stuff to fruit, because that's a really common thing. And this is a kind of one of those other kind of mythy kind of things that people have with fruit, is they say that they fear that it's going to create too fast of a sugar spike, or they're afraid that that it's going to cause yeast overgrowth, and they don't want to overdo fruit. And that the mainstream advice is typically to add fat to fruit to blunt the sugar effect, and to make it longer burning. But in my perspective, and it's kind of funny because I actually just saw a blog post by Robbie Barbero and Dr. Cyrus. They're the head of Mastering Diabetes, and amazing people that are really helping people reverse diabetes. They just did a whole blog post on why that's really not optimal for insulin function and for actual good sugar metabolism. When I was talking about food combining and first learning about this kind of stuff, one of the first things that really hit me and was just like mind blowing to me was to switch from looking at fruit as a snack and to look at it as a whole meal, and that it's perfect by itself, that you can of course add some greens to it and other stuff like that, but it's perfectly digesting and really good actually for blood sugar mechanism, blood sugar balance. In fact, with diabetes, fruit is a perfect food for diabetics, and people who focus on fruit on a low fat program can see type 2 diabetes reversed in a matter of weeks. It's really amazing. But by pairing fat with the fruit, what happens is, yes, we do slow down the absorption, but what it's doing is prolonging the amount of time that the fruit is going to be in the digestive tract, which can cause fermentation, poor digestion. As long as we're eating food on an empty stomach, and that's kind of one of the things that couples with food combining and more effective ways of eating fruit is eating it on a completely empty stomach. That's going to ensure better digestion by far than trying to pair it with a food to slow the digestion, such as that fat and fruit combo, which also makes it harder on insulin function, because when you have the elevated fat levels being eaten, running through your bloodstream, then insulin isn't going to be as effective either.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Okay. So let's see here.
Yeah, the way Dr. Cyrus and Robbie kind of put it was that mixing the fat with the fruit is trying to cover up the issue of poor metabolic health or insulin resistance while still contributing to that same problem. It's like instead lowering the fat content of the diet and pairing the fruit with greens, if you want to slow it down, is better for digestion and metabolic health than mixing with fats.
Yeah, and they're amazing. I think their program is Mastering Diabetes. And so, yeah, if you're not familiar,
They have a New York Times bestseller.
What was that?
They're amazing. They have a New York Times bestselling book by that name too, Mastering Diabetes, and their mission statement is something along the lines of helping people to realize that type 2 diabetes is a choice. That you can actually reverse it very easily with food, and that for the absolute most part, unfortunately, people create it by the foods they eat.
Yeah. Wow.
And their diet, their lifestyle.
And I think you touched on a really important thing about eating when you're empty, when your stomach is not digesting. I know during the day, a lot of, people might be like, especially if they're new to eating raw, okay, I ate this big bowl of fruit or this big salad or whatever, I'm still hungry half an hour later. And so then you don't get the opportunity to allow the digestion process to start and then get to the end game. And so, how would someone go about making sure they're eating the full amount they're going to have their digestion and that full feeling long enough to get through the whole thing to the next meal? Any tips?
Yeah, for sure. And I'm painfully aware that I'm mentioning, that it's really individual, but it really is in a lot of cases, dependent upon people's individual goals. Like, are they looking to do 100% raw food? Are they looking to do high raw food? Are they doing this short term? What foods are they wanting to focus on? What are their activity levels? All this kind of stuff. So that can make it different. I'll briefly divide those into two things, because if someone's looking to go all raw, that is going to be a little bit different than if they're doing high raw, because if you're doing all raw, most people in the first 2 weeks, they're almost always going to be under eating calories. Their body is burning through tissue. They're accelerating detoxification, which can have its own kind of realities. And they're not used to eating the appropriate volumes of food. Also, usually they're a little bit less hydrated and may not have as efficient blood sugar metabolism. I'm not pronouncing that right, but blood sugar function compared to someone who's been doing this for a prolonged period of time. So, if they're coming from that place, typically they're going to be drawn to more watery fruits and citrus fruits and, kind of tangy fruits rather than really dense sweet fruits, which sweet fruits make it a heck of a lot easier to get enough calories. But again, in the first few weeks when someone's applying a raw food diet and their body's trying to release more than trying to build, they usually are just drawn to those kind of juicier citruses and stuff like that, which is, again, it kind of contributes to not getting as much calories. But what I usually see is after about 2 weeks, they hit a wall where they either start eating more calories or they start introducing in cooked foods or heavy fatty foods and stuff to make up for the deficit they've had for those first 2 weeks. The way to simplify it, though, really is basically, focus on the foods you enjoy the most. When you're hungry, eat them with no abandon. I genuinely do find that eating right between as much as you enjoy and as much as you can, no forcing. It's just like not being afraid that you're going to overeat, as long as you're enjoying it and you're not just shoving it down like in a stressed, weird state. If you're just mindfully enjoying it, you're going to be able to eat a lot more than you think, because a lot of the water content, it goes through the cell wall of the stomach really quick and absorbs. And this goes into this fairly quickly with raw foods. They do digest quite quickly. And then on top of that, include as much greens as you like, and do that as many times throughout the day as it requires to stay full. Of course, enjoy some recipes if you like. I do generally recommend, though, keeping it simple and fruit focused for most of the day, and then have the heartier, kind of heavier meal at night when you have a bit more time to chill and sit down and spend more time fork to mouth.
What would you
on the high road?
I was just going to say, what's an example of a heartier dinner or later day? I was just didn't mean to interrupt you, but I was curious.
Yeah, no, for sure. I typically, for myself, I usually eat 2 meals a day. But again, like I said, if I just shared what I eat and then someone brand new to this was coming in and trying to apply it, it probably wouldn't be beneficial for them. They'd overburden their digestive tract. And for most people, it's going to require somewhere between 3 to 5 meals per day to get all you need. I generally recommend focusing on the fruit and the greens up front, and then later in the day go for more greens and more savory stuff. But a heartier savory meal, that could be a big salad, it could be a big zucchini noodle dish, it could be a stew, it could be a curry. I often make curries; those are my favorite, and probably my favorite curry of all time. I freeze and thaw broccoli, chickpeas, and I partially dehydrate mushrooms, and I make that as a base, and then I make a nice thick curry sauce with tomatoes, a bit of mango, some ginger, curry powder, hemp seeds, maybe a little bit of onion in there, and beautiful.
Okay, I think we're all hungry.
Yeah, I'm getting hungry too. It's almost 8 o'clock, but I haven't had dinner yet.
Well, we did have a question in the chat from Apple a Day. Is there an optimal time to enjoy fruits? And you kind of touched on that, but I wanted just to make sure that was clear, morning versus evening. Optimal for digestion is the remaining part of that question that came in.
Yeah, the number one thing that I'd say with fruits to optimize digestion is to eat them on a completely empty stomach. And, we've all had the experience where we ate too late at night. We woke up the morning burping in the morning and tasting last night's meal. Well, that's not an empty stomach. So if you ate late last night, you might find you need to wait a couple hours after waking up and have some water to get clear. The best preparation for the day starts the day before. And that's why people say, try not to eat before 3 or 4 hours before bedtime, so you can actually digest before you lay down to rest and really slow down digestion. So the best times of day, it can be any time of the day. It's just, again, on an empty stomach. I generally speaking, and we're talking about optimizing, because I used to take things like food combining as a black and white rule, thinking like food combining good, not food combining bad. There's a lot more gray towards that. And it's, again, I see it more as a tool for optimal digestion rather than a rule book that means great digestion, bad digestion. the harder time someone's having with digestion, the more they might want to apply it, But the big thing again with fruit is just having an empty stomach. Typically for optimizing digestion, I wouldn't recommend having more than a small bit of fruit. Like if you're having meals of fruit, I wouldn't recommend having it anytime after having cooked food. And I wouldn't really recommend it after having large amounts of fat. A tablespoon here or there or whatever, no biggie. But if you're eating 4 avocados, I wouldn't then a couple hours later have a whole bunch of bananas and dates. You're going to survive it. You might just get a bit of gas and it's going to be a little harder on your blood sugar. What you do once in a while isn't really a big deal, but what you do consistently does add up, So the very basics of this, I'd say, is, like when hungry, eat fruit, enjoy as much greens as you want with it. And then when you have time to sit down, some people find that lunch is perfect. Other people find that dinner is perfect. Have a big veggie-based meal that may include some acid fruit or some fruit in it. And also may include fruit veggies, like cucumbers and tomatoes and peppers and, some fat and all that good stuff.
Okay. So how do fiber-rich foods impact mineral absorption? And what's the best way to balance like a fiber intake for optimal digestion?
Yeah, that's a big question. And it does again kind of come back in part to where somebody's at and what their specific goals are. If somebody is coming from a place where they're not used to eating a lot of fiber, well then, you're going to want to slowly introduce it again, kind of especially with the greens. Fruit fiber typically as well is better handled by most people, even if they aren't really used to it. Whereas greens and hardier veggies, cruciferous or beans and stuff like that, oftentimes requires a little bit of slower introduction and slowly ramping those up. Whole food fiber is going to be different than blended fiber. It's going to be a little bit faster absorption with the blended fiber, which can actually be really beneficial for people who are having a hard time with greens. The blending or the juicing can help you get those in with a little bit less demand on the fiber, especially with the juicing, of course. But yeah, it is one of those kind of balancing acts, unfortunately, and sometimes people do overburden themselves and try and do everything at once and eat a whole bunch all at once, especially of the greens, veggies, and other stuff like that, and overburden their microbiome and their digestive system. So it is kind of that slow and steady approach, chewing really well, including juices in the meantime if you have bad digestion, or if you just really love juices, it's a great way to get in a bunch of dense minerals. I really would focus more on green juices rather than fruit juices. The whole fruit and the fiber in the fruit is amazing as it is. Green smoothies is a great way to boost that up as well and make it a little bit easier on the digestion. And as we said before, trying to make sure that you're kind of more calm and balanced, not as stressed out, well hydrated, maybe optimally got some exercise or a walk. All of those things actually really help with digestion and absorption.
Yeah, this is great, and I appreciate you going over some of it again, because it's good to hear it more than once. So, what are your thoughts on B12 supplementation for raw foodists?
Yeah, I'm not typically a prophylactic supplementer, meaning just in case supplementing, but B12 is one where I think it is wise to be aware of it and to recognize again that most people in most diets are shown to be, it's like I think it's 60+% of people of all diets are low or deficient in B12, and depending upon your lifestyle and what you eat and all that kind of stuff, it can either be vastly diminished or it can slowly take years to diminish. For myself, for example, I got blood tests when I was 6 years into raw food. I think 7 or 8, 9, 10. I've had at least 6 or 7 blood tests over the years. But the one thing that my doctor said, you have the best blood work I've ever seen. I'm going to recommend clients to you. He actually recommended his daughter to me and stuff like that. But the one thing was vitamin B12. It was consistently going down over time. And at one point, I just, in the beginning 10 years, I had a harder line against supplementation. And I thought it was a failure of myself or the diet, and so I also had pride around, I don't supplement at all, and there's a weird pride around it. But I recognize that it's very, very important. B12 is absolutely huge, for mental function, long-term memory, for again, nerve impulses, for cellular flexibility, for even for digestion and inflammation markers, and so many things. It's like, your ability to handle stress, all those things. So what I recommend instead is, you could, if you want, just in case, if you have been vegan for a long time, most people eating most diets are actually supplementing already, because if you drink any plant milks, or you eat anything processed, or even when people are eating animal products and stuff like that, all of these things are actually supplemented with vitamin B12. A lot of people don't know that the cattle industry, they're shot up with B12 and a whole bunch of other things all the time. I'm not recommending those, but they think they're getting it from the source, but they're deficient as well, because they're not eating their species specific diet. And we live in a time where we're over sanitized, and we're not really subjected to the bacteria and the natural kind of exposure to those things that we would if we were living out in nature. So I do think that B12 is one of those that you want to, at the very least, be very well aware of. If you're exhibiting any symptoms at all, or if you just do some routine tests, get your homocysteine and your UMMA or MMA test done to see where you're at. And the beautiful thing about B12 is it's a water soluble. It's we pee out the excess. You can't really overdo it. It's super inexpensive. Like, it can be as much as like $5 a year for some sublingual tablets you just put on your tongue every couple of days or every week or so, depending upon, again, where you're at, where your levels are. If you need to really boost them, or you're trying to maintain them, it's a little different with each thing. But that's actually really the only supplement that I've taken with regularity on the last 21 years. The last 10 of that, I've taken it with some regularity. And other than that, I've occasionally taken vitamin D when I'm not getting enough sun in the winter, living in the cold climates.
Okay. Thank you for that. Yeah, vitamin B12 is super important for anybody, I think. So I do
Yeah.
want to ask you if we can talk a little bit about sprouting. I'm wondering, do soaking or sprouting or fermenting foods help with nutrient absorption? And if so, which food, in your opinion, benefits us the most?
Yeah, that's another really big one. And there's controversy around the application of those foods. Like, some versions of the raw food diet, they're like totally against them, and others are like, they're the most important thing. We got to have all of them, and stuff like that. I really do come from a fruit and greens centric kind of background, where the more I really focus on fruit and greens, the better I feel, the better results I get. And at the same time, I do enjoy adding all those other foods, whether it's occasional ferments or sprouts and stuff like that, into the diet. And it's going to depend in part on what we're talking about, whether we're talking about microgreens, or sprouting, say, sunflower seeds, or something even hardier. It kind of depends. Say lentils or beans, stuff like that. Each of those may have some different realities, but by and large, soaking, whether we're talking about pseudo grains like buckwheat, or we're talking about lentils or garbanzos, or we're talking about pumpkin seeds or anything like that, we're going to be able to absorb everything easier if we pre-soak it. For, generally speaking, we want to pre-soak for like 4 to 8 hours. You can do it even longer, pour off the water. And not only does it deactivate enzyme inhibitors and just make everything, start the germination process, and make things more bioavailable in the seed, pseudo grain, or nut itself, but it also raises the water content of the food itself, which is going to make it easier to crunch up and digest as well. So I think that it's really interesting. This kind of goes back to individuality a little bit. Depending upon the application of the raw food diet you're doing, it becomes either more or less important. So while I really live, breathe, and promote a lower fat fruit-based diet that does include some nuts and seeds, but I'm talking small amounts, like generally a handful or two every day or two, like 2 to 4 tablespoons. And I really focus on the omega-3 fats like chia, flax, and hemp, and walnuts and stuff like that. I do soak my walnuts, but I don't really soak my chia, flax, or hemp. I just blend it into sauces. Whereas if I was eating a high fat diet and actually including large amounts of nuts and seeds or large amounts of sprouts, I mean, sprouts you got to soak anyway, right? Otherwise, you're crunching on dried beans and lentils and buckwheat. Not very nice, and much benefit to soaking those. But if we're talking about the nuts and seeds, in the quantities I eat them, I'm not worried about it. It's not something I really do. But if I was eating large amounts, like some people do, they eat like a keto kind of based raw food diet. Then it's even more important to really make sure that you're more diligent in soaking those and removing those, because otherwise, if that's a bulk of your diet, you don't want you want to be getting as much as you possibly can, right? Whereas if it's a very small amount of your diet, is not really a huge deal, but you can still benefit from soaking those things. Absolutely.
Okay. So just interesting to hear all of that, because I was feeling or heard that it's really important for the protein and for all the other things to make sure to incorporate that. And I understand that everybody's different. But just for one more question regarding sprouting, I heard that soaking sprouts before you start
Yeah.
sprouting them in a food grade hydrogen peroxide, like 4%, for a handful of hours
Yeah.
before you actually soak them is beneficial for killing mold. I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that can be really beneficial. I don't know about hours. I don't think it would require that much time. Another easy version of that too is, you can soak your lentils, your seeds, your sprouts, whatever they may be, in water with just a capful or two of food grade vinegar, and that can kind of do the same thing, but just kind of swish it around for about 10-15 minutes and then rinse it really, really well. But the H2O2 dilute with water is amazing disinfectant and antibacterial and all that good stuff. Because oftentimes, if you're dealing with sprouting or you're dealing with fermenting, one of the issues that can come up is, just like you said, mold growth or bacteria growth that can actually be detrimental. So it's a beneficial thing, I think, to do, to make sure that, one, you're getting good quality things that you're sprouting, and then two, to at least clean them off decently, and that can really go the extra mile. I usually use the vinegar trick myself.
Okay. Well, this has been so fun. I do have one more question in the chat. I could go on and on. You're just such a wonderful wealth of information, and I so appreciate it. But there is a question from Sunjoy. So, which raw vegan foods would you say have the most B12?
Oh, wow. Well, that's a funny question. Years past, we would have said none. But now we know there's a aquatic plant called duckweed that is, it has natural B12 occurring from the bacteria symbiosis there. But it's the only, I guess, also spirulina or chlorella, although most sources say that those forms of B12 are analog form. And what that means is that they're not actually utilizable by the body. We want, we want a bioavailable B12. And so the duckweed, but the reality is, it's like you're going to be paying quite a bit for duckweed. It's not super readily accessible unless you grow it yourself. And it probably makes more sense just to supplement. And some people, again, like, I thought it used to be a failing of the lifestyle or the diet, but the reality is, it's just we're so far removed from our natural habitat, and B12 is a bacterial borne nutrient. It's not really prevalent in foods. It's on the surface of foods, or on the root hairs, or around the stem ends of foods. And if we were living in a more pristine environment, less, trying to scrub everything and sterilize everything, and we're eating all of our food from out there, our hands are in the dirt, and we also do produce B12 in our body, but it's absorbed higher than it's produced in the body. So what that actually means is, if we were out in nature and we were, going to the bathroom, we accidentally touched just a little bit, we wiped ourselves and we touched some food, we would actually be getting little bits of B12 from that. And you can also get it from natural streams and rivers, but now, those are processed through sewage treatment plants, and not really, and then put chlorine in them and all that kind of stuff. So all is to say, it's a bacterial borne environmental nutrient that we would likely be getting more than enough of if we were living completely naturally outside. The sad thing is, though, I do know people who try to do that, and they're like opposed to supplementation completely. Like, they're like philosophically opposed to it, and they garden and get outside and do all that kind of things, but still they end up being B12 deficient. And I'm not saying it's impossible. There are people I know that don't supplement, but it's a very rare individual. And the chances of major, lifelong injury, because I have met people who became deficient and were deficient for long enough that they caused like unreversible neurological and nerve damage. So neurological nerve damage. So it's nothing to mess around with. That's why, kind of like you mentioned too, I think it's one of those that is very good to be aware of. It's not going to be instant that you're just going to go deficient in B12, but if you do some tests every once in a while, or otherwise you just want to get some pills and take them every once in a while, that's more rational, I think, than trying to stay away from it completely for fear of supplementing.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for the questions. There's a lot of chat information going on. People are excited. Natasha Grace says, I have Chris's 21-day summer meal plan. It's awesome. And I was just thinking, I will pull it out. First day of summer. So that's awesome. And yes, if you want to share with me your link for the product that you mentioned earlier, after this becomes a replay, we will also put it on our site and help, in any way that we can. Are there any other final, tips or advice or anything on this particular topic that you'd like to share? Because I want to be mindful and respectful of your time.
Oh, no, that's so sweet. This has been great. I love the questions too, and your questions have been great as well. I just love sharing this stuff. It's made such a huge impact in my life, and I know that it ripples out and it helps others, and also that it is, realistically the best thing we can do for the planet and for the animals out there. So it's just there's always wins, and I think the biggest thing that I'd really like to showcase with this talk here is nutrition isn't something we really need to stress about, and stress is counterproductive to health. We're looking to become healthier and happier and more connected, and the more stressed and worried we are about these things, the further we're getting from them. Again, when we're talking about a plant-strong diet, fruits and vegetables and nuts and seeds and stuff like that, it is pretty hard to go wrong. And most of the time, people, I think, have a harder time, or I won't say go wrong, but have a harder time because they overcomplicate it, and like try and get maximum everything in every single bite and worry about every single individual nutrient. When it comes down to it, if we're focusing on the fruits and vegetables and leafy greens and nuts and seeds that we genuinely enjoy, that we just like, when we think about eating them, we're stoked, we're happy about it, and when we focus on those, and we focus on eating until we're totally satiated, we're just really happy, stick a fork in me, it's really hard to underdo it. And the beautiful thing is the seasons, with the seasons, change comes and new fruits and vegetables come in. So we're getting variety. And once you start to get sick of peaches of the summer, which I don't know if people are going to get sick of them, but once you do, and then you start to get the fall fruits and veggies and all that stuff in, and I can honestly say, my first, what would have been, at least 8 years or so of really like changing my diet, maybe 9 years of changing my diet, and like the bulk of my nutritional learning, where I was like head down reading multiple books all the time, going to school and all this stuff. I was concerned about nutrition, and I was looking at bananas as potassium, and I was looking at, spinach as iron, and, stuff like that. And I was like, I got to get this, and I got to get this high source. And I was doing this and this and that. And when I slowed down and really, again, recognized, kind of like I said at the beginning, that other people would probably be better off to be concerned than me. I'm eating the most nutrient dense foods on the planet per calorie, Once I let go of nutrition, and again, I'm not saying like throw the baby out and there aren't things to be conscious of. We've been talking more about being conscious of things than worried about things. Once I got to that understanding of, some basics and was conscious of those and knew how to do it, I let go of concern. I stopped looking at food as nutrition. I actually nowadays, I don't eat for nutrition. I just eat the fruits and vegetables that I genuinely love and eat my face off. And I experienced way more heights in my results and how I felt and how fun the diet was by making that simple shift than the previous 7 years before that, because it seemed like it was a bit of a stress and a calculation, and I needed to be really worried and proficient. but again, most diseases of today are diseases of excess, not diseases of nutrients being lacking. And for sure, you can be lacking in nutrients. We talked about if you don't eat any greens or vegetables. We both are definitely on the same page of eat a lot of greens, eat your veggies, right? Let's get more of those in. Um, but short of that, and short of being completely opposed to all supplementation and completely shutting out any relevance of tests, I do recommend, if you're doing this for a long period of time and it's your lifestyle, get some tests done, see how you're doing. And there's a value in getting more than one test, because then you can see where trends are. One test is just a picture, but 2 tests over 6 months or a year will show you if you're maintaining, gaining, or going down, and then you can adjust, right? But again, to wrap this up in a bow, this lifestyle doesn't have to be overcomplicated. It doesn't have to be a math equation. There are certain stuff to know, and like anything, it takes some time to get to get things straight and to understand it. But it can really be as simple as just focusing on the fruits and vegetables you love and eating with complete abundance and exploring new recipes and new seasonal treats as they come in. And that's really tasty, fun, and easy and juicy.
That's fantastic. And I will have your information in in the replays in the show notes. But just quickly, where is the best place for people to find you if they want to find you?
Well, thank you for that. I'd say the best place is therawadvantage.com. So that's just therawadvantage.com. That's it right there. And that has my links to everything, from Twitter to, or I guess X, to Facebook to Instagram. I'm the Raw Advantage everywhere, essentially.
Well, thank you again. I truly appreciate your time and expertise, and it's been fun. I had a good time, and I learned stuff. Hopefully our viewers learned stuff as well. And yeah, I would welcome maybe in the future, connecting with you again if you're up for it. And just
Absolutely.
yeah, just want to tell people. Don't forget to eat your greens, and please give plants a chance. They're amazing. And Chris, is a strong individual and looks very healthy and not, malnourished. Anyways, we just appreciate your openness and honesty. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much again for having me on. It's been a
Thank
pleasure.
you. Take care, everyone. We'll